Hello everyone, welcome back to Read Along Saturday, and today we are continuing with our book The Prince by Niccolò Machiavelli. Today we are starting with chapter number 7. It would be followed by its discussion, and let's see how many chapters we can complete in this episode. So, chapter 7, concerning new principalities which are acquired either by the arms of others or by good fortune. Those who solely by good fortune become princes from being private citizens have little trouble in rising, but much is keeping atop. They have not any difficulties on the way up because they fly, but they have many when they reach the summit. Such are those to whom some state is given either for money or by the favor of him who bestows it. As happened to many in Greece in the cities of Iona and the Hellespont, where princes were made by Darius, in order that they might hold the cities both for his security and his glory. As also were those emperors who, by the corruption of the soldiers, from being citizens came to empire. Such stand simply elevated upon the goodwill and the fortune of him who has elevated them to most inconstant and unstable things. Neither have they the knowledge requisite for the position, because unless they are men of great worthy and ability, it is not reasonable to expect that they should know how to command, having always lived in private condition. Besides, they cannot hold it because they have not the forces which they can keep friendly and faithful. States that rise unexpectedly, then, like all other things in nature which are born and grow rapidly, cannot leave their foundations and correspondencies fixed in such a way that the first storm will not overthrow them, unless, as is said, those who unexpectedly become princes are men of so much ability that they know they have to be prepared at once to hold that which fortune has thrown into their laps, and that those foundations which others have laid before they became princes, they must lay afterwards. Concerning these two methods of rising to be a prince by ability or fortune, I wish to adduce two examples within our own recollection, and these are Francesco Sforza and Cesare Borgia. Francesco, by proper means and with great ability, from being a private person rose to be Duke of Milan, and that he had acquired with 1,000 anxieties he kept with little trouble. On the other hand, Cesare Borgia, called by the people Duke Valentino, acquired his state during the ascendancy of his father, and on its deadline he lost it, notwithstanding that he had taken every measure and done all that ought to be done by a wise and able man to fix firmly his roots in the states which the arms and fortunes of others have bestowed on him. Because, as is stated above, he who has not first laid his foundations may be able with great ability to lay them afterwards, but they will be laid with trouble to the architect and danger to the building. If, therefore, all the steps taken by the Duke be considered, it will be seen that he laid solid foundations for his future power. And I do not consider it superfluous to discuss them, because I do not know what better percepts to give a new prince than the example of his actions. And if his dispositions were of no avail, that was not his fault, but the extraordinary and extreme malignity of fortune. Alexander VI, in wishing to aggrandize the Duke, his son, had many immediate and prospective difficulties. Firstly, he did not see his way to make him master of any state that was not a state of the church, and if he was willing to rob the church, he knew that the Duke of Milan and the Venetians would not consent, because Faenza and Rimini were already under the protection of Venetians. Besides this, he saw the arms of Italy, especially those by which he might have been assisted, in the hands that would fear the aggrandizement of the Pope, namely the Orsini and the Colonnesi and their following. It behoved them, therefore, to upset this state of affairs and embroil the powers as to make himself securely master of part of their states. This was easy for him to do because he found the Venetians, moved by the other reasons, inclined to bring back the French into Italy. He would not only have opposed this, but he would render it more easy by dissolving the former marriage of King Louis. Therefore, the king came into Italy with the assistance of the Venetians and the consent of Alexander. He was no longer in Milan than the Pope had soldiers from him for the attempt on the Romagna, which yielded to him on the reputation of the king. The Duke, therefore, having acquired the Romagna and beaten the Colonnesi, while wishing to hold and to advance further, was hindered by two things. The one, his forces did not appear loyal to him. The other, the goodwill of France. That is to say, he feared that the forces of the Orsini, which he was using, would not stand to him. That not only might be they hinder him from winning more, but might themselves seize what he had won, and that the king might also do the same. Of the Orsini, he had a warning then. After taking Faenza and attacking Bologna, he saw them go very unwillingly to that attack. And as to the king, he learned his mind when he himself, after taking the duchy of Urbino, attacked Tuscany, and the king made him desist from that undertaking. Hence, the duke decided to depend no more upon the arms and the luck of others. For the first thing, he weakened the Orsini and Colonnesi parties in Rome by gaining to themselves all their adherents who were gentlemen, making them his gentlemen, giving them good pay and according to their rank honoring them with office and command in such a way that in a few months all attachments to the faction was destroyed and turned entirely to the duke. After this, he waited an opportunity to crush the Orsini, having scattered the adherent of the Colonna house. This came to him soon and he used it well. For the Orsini, perceiving at length that the aggrandizement of the duke and the church was to ruin to them, called a meeting of Magnone in Perugia. From this sprung the rebellion of Urbino and the tumults in the Romagna, with endless dangers to the duke, all of which he overcame with the help of the French. Having restored his authority not to leave it at risk by trusting either to the French or the other outside forces, he had recourse to his wiles, and he knew so well how to conceal his mind that by the mediation of Signor Pagolo, whom the duke did not fail to secure with all kinds of attention, giving him money, apparel, horses, the Orsini was reconciled, so that their simplicity brought them into his power at Sinigalia. Having exterminated the leaders and turned their partisans into his friends, the duke had sufficiently laid good foundation to his power. Having all the Romagna and the duchy of Urbino and the people now beginning to appreciate their prosperity, he gained them all over to himself. And as this point is worthy to notice and to be imitated by others, I am not willing to leave it out. When the duke occupied the Romagna, he found it under the rule of weak masters who rather plundered their subjects than ruled them, and gave them more cause for disunion than for union, so that the country was full of robbery, quarrels, and every kind of violence. And so, wishing to bring back peace and obedience to authority, he considered it necessary to give it a good governor. Thereupon, he promoted Messer Ramiro de Orca, a swift, cruel man, to whom he gave the fullest power. This man in short time restored peace and unity with the greatest success. Afterwards, the duke considered it was not advisable to confer such excessive authority, for he had no doubt but that he would become obedience. So, he set up a court of judgment in the country under the most excellent precedent, wherein all cities had their advocates. And because he knew that the past severity had caused some hatred against himself, so, to clear himself in the minds of people and gain them entirely to himself, he desired to show that if any cruelty had been practiced, it had not originated with him, but in the natural sternness of the minister. Under this pretense, he took Ramiro, and one morning caused him to be executed and left on the piazza of Siena, with the block and a bloody knife at his side. The barbarity of this spectacle caused the people to be once satisfied and dismayed. But let us return whence we started. I say that the Duke, finding himself now sufficiently powerful and partly secure from immediate dangers by having armed himself in his own way, and having in a great measure crushed those forces in his vicinity that could injure him if he wished to proceed with his conquest, had next to consider France. For he knew that the king, who too late was aware of his mistake, would not support him. And from this time he began to seek new alliances and temporize with France in the expedition which she was making towards the kingdom of Naples against the Spaniards who were besieging Gaeta. It was his intention to secure himself against them, and this he would have quickly accomplished had Alexander lived. Such was his line of action as to present affairs. But as to the future, he had to fear, in the first place, that the new successor to the church might not be friendly to him and might seek to take from him that which Alexander had given him. So he decided to act in 4 ways. Firstly, by exterminating the families of those lords whom he had despoiled, so as to take away the pretext from the Pope. Secondly, by winning to himself all the gentlemen of the Rome, so as to be able to curb the Pope with their aid, and as has been observed. Thirdly, by converting the college more to himself. Fourthly, by acquiring so much power before the Pope should die that he could by his own measures resist the first shock. Of these 4 things, at the death of Alexander he had accomplished 3, for he had killed as many as the dispossessed lords as he could lay hands on, and few had escaped. He had won over the Roman gentlemen, he had the most numerous party in the college, and as to any fresh acquisition, he intended to become the master of Tuscany, for he already possessed Perugia and Piombino, and Pisa was under his protection. And as he had no longer to study France, for the French were already driven out of kingdom of Naples by the Spaniards, and in this way both were compelled to buy his goodwill. He pounced down upon Pisa. After this, Lucca and Siena yielded at once, partly through hatred and partly through fear of the Florentines, and the Florentines would have had no remedy had he continued to prosper, as he was prospering the year that Alexander died. For he had acquired so much power and reputation that he would have stood by himself, and no longer have depended on the luck and the forces of others, but solely on his own power and ability. But Alexander died 5 years after he had first drawn the sword. He left the Duke with the state of Romagna alone consolidated, with the rest in the air between 2 most powerful hostile armies and sick unto death. Yet there were in the Duke such boldness and ability that he knew so well how men are to be won or lost, so firm were the foundation which in so short time he had laid, that if he had not had these armies on his back, or if he had been in good health, he would have overcome all difficulties. And it is seen that his foundations were good, for the Romagna awaited him for more than a month. In Rome, although but half alive, he remained secure, and whilst the Baglioni, the Vitelli, and Orsini might come to Rome, they could not effect anything against him. He could have not made Pope him whom he wished. At least the one whom he did not wish would not have been elected. But if he had been in sound health at the death of Alexander, everything would have been different to him. On the day that Julius II was elected, he told me that he had thought of everything that might occur at the death of his father, and had provided a remedy of all, except that he had never anticipated that when the death did happen, he himself would be on the point to die. When all the actions of the Duke are recalled, I do not know how to blame him, but rather it appears to be, as I have said, that I ought to offer him for imitation to all those who, by the fortune or the arms of others, are raised to government. Because he, having a lofty spirit and far-reaching aims, could not have regulated his conduct otherwise, and only the shortness of life of Alexander and his own sickness frustrated his designs. Therefore, he who considered it necessary to secure himself in this new principality, to win France, to overcome either by force or fraud, to make himself beloved and feared by people, to be followed and revered by the soldiers, to exterminate those who have power or reason to hurt him, to change the old order of things for new, to be severe and gracious, magnanimous and liberal, to destroy or disloyal soldiery, and to create new, to maintain friendship with kings and princes in such a way that they must help him with zeal and offend with caution. Cannot find a more lively example than the actions of his man. Only can he be blamed for the election of Julius II, in whom he made a bad choice, because, as is said, not being able to elect a pope to his own mind, he could have hindered any other form being elected pope. And he ought never to have consented to the election of a cardinal whom he had injured or who had cause to fear him if they become pontiffs. For men injured either from fear or hatred. Those who he had injured, amongst others, were San Pietro ad Vilcola, Colonna, San Giorgio, and Ascanio. The rest, is becoming pope, had to fear him. Rouen and Spaniards expected. The latter from their relationship and obligation, the former from his influence, the kingdom of France having relations with him. Therefore, about everything the Duke ought to have created a Spaniard pope, and failing him, he ought to have consented to Rouen and not San Pietro ad Vincula. He who believes that the new benefits will cause great personages to forget old injuries is deceived. Therefore, the Duke erred in his choice, and it was the cause of his ultimate ruin. So, let's discuss chapter 7 a little bit. Okay, so the core argument for this chapter was that the principalities acquired through luck or by power of others are easy to gain but extremely difficult to hold, as they lack deep roots and depend on external forces. With contrast to chapter 6 that we discussed earlier, the ones who are built on their own virtue, these states are inherently unstable. Example the author has given is of Francesco Sforza and Cesare Borgia. So Francesco Sforza is an example of success gained in Milan by his own virtue in arms, so held it easily. Now, Cesare Borgia, the main case study, acquired his state by his father's Pope Alexander VI fortune in arms. Machiavelli praises Borgia's immense virtue in trying to consolidate power. He eliminated his rivals, he pacified Romagna ruthlessly, built his own loyal army, and planned for future independence. Now, Borgia's downfall was, despite his virtue, he failed due to extreme malignity of fortune. His father's sudden death and his own severe illness, leading to the election of a hostile Pope Julius II. Now, the key takeaway from is that a prince gaining power through fortune must immediately apply great virtue to build strong foundation or risk losing everything. Chapter 8. Concerning those who have obtained a principality by wickedness. Although a prince may rise from a private station in two ways, neither of which can be entirely attributed to fortune or genius, yet it is manifest to me that I must not be silent on them. Although one could be more capricious treated, then I discuss republics. These methods are when either by some wicked or nefarious ways one ascends to the principality, or when by the favor of his fellow citizen a private person becomes the prince of his own state. And speaking of the first method, it will be illustrated by two examples. One ancient, the other one modern. And without entering further into the subject, I consider these two examples will suffice those who might be compelled to follow them. Agathocles the Sicilian became the king of Syracuse, not only from a private but from a low and abject position. This man, the son of a potter, through all the chances in his life, fortune, always led an infamous life. Nevertheless, he accompanied his infamies with so much ability of mind and body that, having devoted himself to military profession, he rose to its ranks to be praetor of Syracuse. Being established in that position and having deliberate resolute to make himself prince and to seize by violence without obligation to offer that which had been conceded to him by assent. He came to an understanding for his purpose, who Amilcar the Carthaginian, who with his army was fighting in Sicily. One morning he assembled the people and the senate of Syracuse as if he had discussed with them things relating to republic, and in the given circle the soldiers killed all senators and the richest person. These dead, he seized and held the princedom of the city without any civil commotion. And although he was twice routed by the Carthaginians and ultimately besieged, yet not only was he able to defend his city, but leaving part of his men for his defense. With the others, he attacked Africa and in a short time raised the siege of Syracuse. The Carthaginians, reduced the extreme necessity, were compelled to come to terms with Agathocles, and leaving Sicily to him, had to be content with the possession of Africa. Therefore, he who considers the action and the genius of this man will see nothing or little which can be attributed to fortune, inasmuch as he attained preeminence, as is shown above, not by the favor of anyone, but step by step in military profession, which steps were gained with 1,000 troubles and perils, and were afterwards boldly held by him with many hazardous dangers. Yet, it cannot be called talent to slay fellow citizens, to deceive friends, to be without faith, without mercy, without religion. Such methods may gain empire, but not glory. Still, if the courage of Agathocles in entering into and extricating himself from dangers be considered, together with his greatness of mind in enduring and overcome hardship, it cannot be seen why he should be esteemed less than most notable captains. Nevertheless, his barbarous cruelty and immunity with infinite wickedness does not permit him to be celebrated among the most excellent men. What he achieved cannot be attributed either by fortune or genius. In our times, during the rule of Alexander VI, Oliverotto the Farmer, having been left an orphan many years ago, was brought up by his maternal uncle Giovanni Fogliani, and in the early days of his youth sent a fighter under Pagolo Vitelli, that being trained under his disciple, he might attain some high precision in the military profession. After Pagolo died, he found there under his brother Vitelzo a very short time. Being endowed with wit and vigorous body and mind, he became the first man in the profession. But in appearing a paltry thing, to serve under the others, he resolved, with the aid of some citizens of Fermo, to whom the slavery of their country was dearer than its liberty, and with the help of Valeschi to seize Fermo, he wrote to Giovanni Foligini that, having been away from home for many years, he wished to visit him and his city, and some measures to look upon his patrimony, and although he had not labored in across anything except honor, yet in order that the citizens should see he had not spent his time in vain, he desired to come honorably, so would be accompanied by 100 horsemen, his friends and retainers. And he entreated Giovanni to arrange that he should be received honorably by the Fermians, all of which would be only in his honor. But Giovanni therefore did not fail in any attentions due to his nephew, and he caused him to be honorably received by the Fermians, and he lodged him in his own house, where, having passed some day and having arranged what was necessary for his wicked designs, Oliverto gave a solemn bouquet, to which he invited Giovanni Foligini and chiefs of Fermo. When the viands and all the other entertainments that are usual in such banquets were finished, Oliverotto artfully began certain grave discourses. speaking of the greatness of Pope Alexander and his son Cesare, and of their enterprises, to which discourse Giovanni and others answered, but he rose at once, saying that much matters ought to be discussed in more private place, and he betook himself to a chamber, whither Giovanni and rest of the citizens went in after him. So no sooner were they seated than soldiers issued from secret places and slaughtered Giovanni and the rest. After these murders, Orvieto, mounted on horseback, rode back to down this town and besieged the chief magistrate in the palace, so that the fear of the people were forced to obey him and to form a government of which he had made himself the prince. He killed all the malcontents who were able to injure him and strengthened himself with the new civil and military ordinances in such a way that in the year during which he had principality, not only was he secure in the city firmer, but he became formidable to all their neighbors. And his destruction would have been as difficult as the Agathocles if he had not allowed himself to be overreached by Cesare Borgia, who took him with Orsini and Vitelli in Senigallia, as was stated above. Thus, 1 year later, he had committed this parricide. He was strangled together with Vitellozzo, whom he had made his leader in valor and wickedness. Some may wonder how it can happen that the Agathocles and his likes, after infinite treacheries and cruelty, should live for long secure in his country and defend himself from external enemies, never be conspired against by his own citizen. Seeing that many others by means of cruelty have never been able to peaceful times to hold the state, still less in the doubtful times of war, I believe that follows from severities, being badly or poorly used. Those may be called properly used if of evil it is possible to speak well, that are applied at one blow and are necessary to one's security, and that are not persisted in afterwards unless they can be turned to the advantage of the subjects. The badly employed are those which, notwithstanding they may be few in the commencement, multiply with time rather than decrease. Those who practice the first system are able to, by aid of God or man, to mitigate in some degree their rule, as Agathocles did. It is impossible for those who follow the other to maintain themselves. Hence, it is to be remarked that in seizing a state, a usurper ought to examine closely into all these injuries which it is necessary for him to inflict, and to do them all at one stroke so as not to have to repeat them daily. And thus, by not unsettling men, he will be able to restore them and win them to himself by benefits. He who does otherwise, either from timidity or evil advice, is always compelled to keep the knife in his hand. Neither can he rely on his subjects, nor can he attach themselves to him, owing to their continued and repeated wrongs. For injuries ought to be done all at one time, so that being tasted less, they offend less. Benefits ought to be given little by little, so that the flavor of them may last longer. And above all things, a prince ought to live amongst his people in such a way that no unexpected circumstances, whether of good or evil, shall make him change. Because if the necessity for this comes in troubled times, you are too late for harsh measures, and mild ones will not help you. For they will be considered as forced from you, and no one will be under any obligation to you for them. Okay, so let us discuss chapter 8 now. So the core concept of this chapter was that how individuals can rise to power through crime and cruelty without resilience on fortune or traditional virtue. Now, examples taken here is first one is of Agathocles, rose to power in Syracuse by massacring senators and leading citizens. Machiavelli acknowledges his skill but condemns his inhuman cruelty. Second example we take is of Oliverotto de Fermo. Seized Fermo by massacring his uncle and leading citizens at a banquet. Now, there is a key distinction between cruelty well used versus ill used. Now, well used is inflicted swiftly, decisively, and at the beginning of the reign, out of necessity, and then ceases, followed by benefits to the people, aims to establish security quickly. Ill used is prolonged and increasing over time, sporadic, and leading to constant fear and hatred from the subjects. The main point here in this chapter was, while morally reprehensibly, Machiavelli argues that certain acts of decisive cruelty and are strategically necessary for a new prince to seize and secure power, provided they are applied correctly, that is, well used cruelty and not a continuous action. So that was it for today. I will see you next Saturday. Until then, keep watching and keep reading.